The Pretoria High Court has declared Norma Mngoma's arrest was unlawful. The court has also ordered the Hawks to return information obtained from Norma's electronic devices. The estranged wife of the former Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba was arrested last July on charges of malicious damage to property and crimen injuria. She was then detained and released on bail the following day. The court found that the elite crime-fighting unit had acted with malice.
When we wrote the letter to the president, let me say it clearly, was after Norma Gigaba or Mngoma appeared before the magistrate court where the charges of criminal injuria and malicious damage to property were proffered against her. We stated at that point that what is being done is a travesty of justice and an abuse of power and authority, because what you did as the state using the Hawks was to intimidate and bully Norma. The charges against Norma were normal charges that should have been dealt with by a police station like Hatfield that received her and detained her, right? But that was not the case. Norma was actually interrogated at his home by a Hawks unit from Mpumalanga. They crossed a province to come and arrest her. That's abuse of state resources and state power, because your husband thinks that he has got the power to do so. We are not going to tolerate that kind of conduct and behavior using taxpayers' money to muscle women and bully them.
For more analysis on the Norma Mngoma case, we cross now to Ms. Kean Ling, an activist and human rights lawyer from Sonke Gender Justice. And I was just looking at you, Kean, as that clip was rolling. You were ferociously nodding your head. What are you in agreement with?
Good evening, and thank you to your viewers as well. I fully agree with the analysis that Advocate Mudemise actually proffered. And I really think, when we speak about Ms. Ngoma's arrest and the recent judgment having it been declared unlawful, it really is a clear case of abuse of power from her husband. And if we look historically in the past 2 years, we've had recently on 2 occasions blatant misuse of state resources by Malusi Gigaba and Deputy Finance Minister David Musondo, who both used the Hawks in 2 separate occasions to settle personal vendettas. And it appears that, we have these powerful men in the elite ruling party that can use law enforcement officials and have them on speed dial, which is a privilege that millions of South African women who constantly have to look over their shoulders do not have. And we're extremely concerned about this trend. And if we don't condemn and we act towards, and addressing this abuse of power by government, we're really concerned about how, our state resources are being used. And it's really disconcerting in these 2 cases, the Hawks' willingness to bend their mandate, which is supposed to be for targeted organized crime, to actually serve and protect men and reinforce a disturbingly patriarchal status quo. And we have what we have, with the country facing gender-based violence, where women remain grossly underreporting of cases of GBV due to the lack of faith in the police and the justice system. We can have these men just summoning South Africa's Directorate of Priority Crime Investigations to support or settle their personal scores. And that's totally unacceptable.
You highlighted 2 cases that have made their way into the public domain, into public platforms, but that's just 2. How common is this occurrence of men in power using their power unlawfully to suppress women, whether it's vengeance or otherwise?
That's a great question, because I think these 2 cases I've mentioned are high-profile cases, because we're dealing with, people in places of high influence and prominence. But to be honest, this is a very common occurrence. The issue of gender and power imbalance throughout our society and culture really does manifest through our economic control, emotional, physical, and verbal abuse. And the judgment itself, with Ms. Mngoma, the judgment itself really interestingly refers to a section of how women's rights are human rights, and even goes to briefly examine how patriarchy has been used and ingrained in our norms, cultures, and values. And I think it's really important that we reflect on these power inequalities between men and women, and how you find, women, girls, and members of the LGBTQI community that are victims of or survivors of GBV. And it truly is a manifestation of power imbalance tilted in favor of men that characterize many, mostly patriarchal cultures around the world. And this collectively shared norm about women's subordinate role in society and these unhealthy gender norms causes the violence against them and perpetuate this power imbalance. And we can speak as Sonke, the number of cases we often receive, from women from, every walk of life who have really, proffered cases that they've previously experienced. So whether it be them opening a case of abuse or assault against their partner or some person, these individuals will open counter, cases against them, or they will have the luxury of financial resources to use them and bully them, as in the case with Ms. Ngoma, and use them in divorce proceedings. And these are just some of the examples of abuse that we've seen on a daily basis in our society.
Now, Ms. Leung, one thing about this case is that it's not linear. It's complex, it's complicated, it's multi-layered. There's a phrase that was said that an unlawful arrest does not constitute an unlawful prosecution. How does that relate to this case, Ms. Ngoma?
Okay, so I mean, the judgment, having studied the judgment, you'll need to, what we do need to distinguish that the judge found that the arrest was unlawful, and that was in relation to the affidavits that were proffered in the urgent application by the respondents. But what is clear for the purpose of the relief that Ms. Ngoma actually sought was not to remove the court hearing, the criminal trial element. It was simply that she wanted the opportunity to have the information that was seized, and copied from her electronic devices, firstly returned to her, and just to declare that the arrest was unlawful. So the issues around the criminal trial is still ongoing and should be ongoing. But with regards to the decision on this application, the judge has confirmed that the arrest, in terms of how they followed procedure, was unlawful, and they agreed that it was malicious, and I think it was the two officers, Captain Mavusa and Sergeant Bambi, had acted ultra various in terms of what their roles were within the Hawks. And of course, let's not forget to mention that these were Hawks from Mpumalanga. It's a different province, which is very, very odd and very strange why they were getting involved in this when it was clearly a matter for the police to investigate.
So the unlawful arrest issue has now been taken care of. There's still two others. There's the criminal injury case as well as the malicious damage to property. How do those fare for Norma Mngoma moving forward now? What ought we to be expecting in that regard?
So just to draw us back to the decision that was handed down 2 days ago, the decision was just around the unlawfulness of the arrest, but it doesn't deal with whether or not Ms. Mngoma is guilty of the two charges that were opened against her. So that still has to go through the courts, and then the magistrate or the judge in that incident will have to weigh up the balance of the evidence that is actually put forward, and they will make an informed decision on her guilt in relation to those two charges.
And as far as the long-term effects of unlawful arrest, what type of impact does this normally have, cases of this nature, on the accused?
So in this case, I mean, I think we need to acknowledge, I think in the broader context, and I think it's been very clear with Ms. Mngoma, she's really suffered a lot of trauma. You could see in the video clip, she was extremely emotional. And I think I would like to speak from a broader perspective, because we speak about how often, we have these power imbalances or abuse of power because of the unbalanced gender norms. And it really is the fact that most of the people that are accused in cases or bullied in these cases because of power imbalances really do suffer trauma. And in this particular case, and it applies to many, because of the way our criminal justice system is not victim-centric or survivor-centric, they often suffer secondary victimization and trauma. And I think it is really important to note that this was a domestic matter that was completely taken out of the boundaries and parameters on how it should actually have been handled. So if there were charges, there were charges laid against Ms. Mngoma, that should have gone through the normal police procedures instead of involving the hawks, which was completely unnecessary. And really the way it was described in the papers, very, very traumatic and completely out of bounds. To deny somebody the right to legal representation and to bully somebody, it's completely unacceptable.
Ms. Leung, we'll leave it at that for this evening, but certainly a case that will continue to unfold in the courts and also in full view of South Africans as well. Thank you very much for your input in this regard.